Thank you so very much, Ms. Ortagus, for accepting our invitation to be part of this interview. My first question is that for the past 40 years, this is the first U.S. administration that has been so supportive in its statements and actions as far as the Iranian people are concerned and their demands inside Iran. In the past, you have seen, in the past week, they have decided not to walk students on the US flag.
Yeah.
They have made all sorts of slogans, for example, that our enemy is not outside, but our enemy is in Iran. Now, the question is that at a time when an Expediency Council member comes and says that those students have to be butchered and the UK ambassador has to be butchered, you're entering into a period of perhaps negotiations.
Right.
Now, what the question they want to ask is, negotiations without preconditions, will that not empower the regime and take away from the support of the people who have been so vocal?
Yeah, that's a good question, although I'd say it would be hard to find anyone thinks that the Donald Trump administration has empowered the regime in Tehran. I think just the opposite. So a couple of things about your questions. First of all, I want the Iranian people to know that we are watching these videos on Instagram and Twitter. We saw how the students, as you describe, avoid walking on the flags. And we were really touched by that. We have said for months now, because these protests, as you know, have been going on for months, not just in the past week. But we have said that we support these protesters, that we stand with people's right around the world, not just in Iran, but around the world, to peacefully protest. And one of the reasons why you saw President Trump tweet in Farsi over the weekend, why you saw Secretary Pompeo and I constantly tweet and speak to the Iranian people, is because we want them to know that we will use the platform that America has to shine a very, very bright light on what's going on in Iran. We were disgusted to learn that the regime had killed at least 1,500 of its own people in the last round of protest, and that we think at least 10,000 people were imprisoned. Killing your own people, imprisoning your own people, turning off the internet, disabling communication devices, just shows how insecure this regime is, how threatened they are by the Iranian people. And so my message is that we are watching, we see these videos, we support you. President Trump has said to the regime and to the whole world that Iran should not turn off the internet, that they should not kill their own people. And so we will use the bright light that we have here in America to shine a light on these protesters. As the second part of your question, as it relates to any potential negotiations, you know, the president tweeted on Sunday that he didn't really care if Iran negotiates or not. We believe that if the regime ever does want to come to the table, we have laid out, Secretary Pompeo laid out about a year and a half ago, 12 ways in which Iran was going to have to, the regime was going to have to behave like a normal nation. So it's very obvious that the president has said that as long as he is president, Iran will never obtain a nuclear weapon. He has said that the regime needs to stop funding terrorist proxies around the region. And we also are obviously very concerned about the large ballistic missile cache that Iran possesses, one of the largest in the regions. It's in defiance of UN Security Council Resolution 2231, and those ballistic missiles were used to attack Iraqi air bases last week. So we have a lot of patience, we have a lot of restraint here, we've shown that. And so if Iran would like to come to the table and decide to behave like a normal nation, if the regime wants to stop terrorizing the region and their own people, then great, we're all for that. But we will continue our policy, our maximum economic pressure campaign, until the regime makes the calculated decision that they're going to give up all of these things that we just talked about.
You talked about internet. Last time, more than 150 hours it was shut down.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans, if it happens again, to come in support of the people?
Well, again, we're certainly asking other nations around the world to join us to speak out whenever the regime does turn off the internet and disable communication devices. We have a lot of methods at our disposal that I can't talk about on camera, where we are trying to help people get around the internet shutdowns. The Department of the Treasury has actually authorized some of these communication devices to be sold, to be given to Iran to help the people. So I don't want to give the regime any information that would help them further block people's access to the internet. But yes, we do remain committed to helping as much as possible.
The Islamic Republic Broadcasting has been involved in the questioning of a lot of protesters, their reporters, and they've been involved, as far as the Iranians are concerned, in supporting the regime. They want to know, will the United States sanction the Islamic Republic Broadcasting?
So we never preview sanctions here at the State Department, but what I will say is you've seen over the past year and a half, our maximum economic pressure campaign, and it was just a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, we actually designated the Iranian information minister, the one that we believed was behind turning off the internet. So we specifically sanctioned him and designated him and called him out. Obviously, last Friday, Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Mnuchin announced from the White House more sanctions on the metals industry in Iran. And of course, we designated another 8 senior officials that were close to Soleimani, the Ayatollah, and all of these people in Iran. And so we are continuing our campaign of naming and shaming people who are involved in turning off the internet and of targeting protesters. We will continue to go after people in the regime who go after protesters.
And about the travels of regime officials or their families and relatives to the United States, whether they have a green card or whether they get a visa, what are you going to do about that? Will they be restricted or not?
So we don't have any new announcements on that here at the State Department. I think it's important to remember that our highest priority here is the safety and security of Americans, of American citizens. So whatever decisions that this administration makes as it relates towards visas, towards any sorts of policies, is first and foremost with the mind of keeping the American people safe.
And my last question, last week there were reports that the State Department, Secretary Pompeo, had asked embassies around the world not to meet with 6 groups. They included separatists and MEK. What is the status of that directive?
Well, first of all, we don't comment on leaked cables here, but what I would say is what American diplomats do around the world. This isn't particular to Iran. This is what we do in Hong Kong. This is what we do in Venezuela, you name it. We meet with all segments of societies to get a full understanding of where the society is, of where the government is. So part of what American diplomats do everywhere in the world is to meet with all segments of society so that we can figure out what our best policy and what the most effective means of diplomacy is for the State Department, and we will continue that practice.
Well, thank you so very much for giving us your time. I know you have a very busy schedule, and I hope to speak to you again very soon.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Thank you.